Soaring vocals again. We've missed you, and who knew that Amy could pick the bass, huh? Thank you so much. Blessings to our little ones as they make their way out. Thankful for our volunteers, and they're faithful investors in our children. Might I introduce myself? I am Pastor Scott, and I am a sinner. What? Have been since the day I arrived, and I assume will continue to address such brokenness until I see Him. Then I will be fully like Him, as 1 John says. But in the meantime, now granted, some of the more obvious evidences of that brokenness have been chiseled away through the years, but there remains more to be done. I'm aware of that and acknowledging that to you this morning. Step one, which we started last week, said we admitted we were powerless over our deepest problems and that our lives had become unmanageable. What? I'll have you know I'm managing very well, but see, that's part of the problem. Everybody else sees the struggle oftentimes better than we see it ourselves, and so this is an invitation to move into address new vestiges, remnants of brokenness that's hiding in there, that the adversary likes to come on and tweak the old man or woman and prove all over again. Yes, indeed, it's still in there, and I'm still a work in progress. John Ortberg, in some of his material surrounding this study, said it is imperative that you don't settle for a wimpy step one. You know, if you're not ready to come clean about the growth that still needs to happen in you, then change is unlikely. You'll continue on until you finally get to the point where you say, I am powerless to become the kind of person that I want to be, that He wants me to be. I can't do that myself. We're going to find that reality in our step. Maybe you're not even comfortable with the notion of 12 steps making their way into church. Let me remind you that those are thoroughly biblical principles, which I'll be taking my time to demonstrate that to you, that this notion is an opportunity to embrace change, that this is not just for drunks and junkies. This is a biblically based in its origin. Now, it has altered through the years in order to make it more available in a secular context. That's not what we're talking about. We're going to name that higher power. His name is Jesus, and we're going to find this morning in Mark chapter 5 just what it looks like when people have that encounter with Jesus with reference to their brokenness. It will require of us to embrace and to welcome, as John Ortberg said, a gift of honest and humble despair. That there's something about us that we see that we just can't manage ourselves. We just haven't been able to get it to change on our own. That was step one. We admitted we were powerless over our deepest problems, and it was introducing a degree of unmanageability into our lives. Once we get there, then the next step is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, I'm not insane. Well, you know, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same things expecting different results. But how are you doing lately at that growth point of becoming like Jesus? And if you just keep doing the same things, are you open to the prospect of coming before Him, inviting Him in and saying, Jesus, I'm not managing that very well. Would you intervene into my life and introduce real, lasting change to me? You see, we won't squeeze the clarity out of a power greater than ourselves. I will tell you that His name is Jesus, and that we need Him to experience the transformation that He wants us to experience, to become the kind of people that He's designed us to be. So, in Mark chapter 5, we're going to find 3 different scenarios. And they are across the board in terms of the spectrum. Some that we would look at and say, oh my gosh, that's what a life out of control looks like. You know them, you've seen them, you're fairly convinced you aren't one of those kind though. And then on the other end, there will be an individual who, from an outer perspective, was highly respected, would have been, his presence would have been welcomed and valued in any setting, but even he too encountered a circumstance that was beyond his control. And although it would have been a costly decision for him, he decided he was going to invite Jesus into that situation. And while that individual's circumstance is playing out, we find a situation of someone who thought they had very carefully managed to keep their issue under wraps until they got to Jesus. I suspect that individual had become a master at cloaking, putting on an appearance that everything was fine, when in all reality, for years, she had suffered. Some of us know what that's like. Maybe you can find some kinship with any of these 3 individuals as we go. The first one, you will know him. He is often referred to as Legion. I don't like to call him that because that's just the nature of his problem. That's not who he was. He was an individual whose life had become so unimaginably tormented by the adversary that people wanted to just get him away. He couldn't be constrained. He was so unbelievably out of control that they would try to bind him and tie him up and with shackles and chains, ropes, whatever it took, and none of it would work. And probably, as is the ultimate destination that the adversary would have for all of us, a complete place of isolation among the dead. For this man existed among the tombs. He had his dwelling among the tombs. Verse 3 says, and no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain. Anymore, they had tried. They didn't like what he introduced into their worlds, into their experiences, into their community. And so they looked for a way to control him, to change that. Because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and shackles broken in pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. Almost to the point of dehumanizing this man. We can do all kinds of things to other people if we dehumanize them. You know, we can justify it in our minds. This guy is just creating chaos in our community, may very well be dangerous, so we'll treat him however we want to in order to establish the kind of control we'd like to have. He was the kind of individual that we just want to put away, out of sight, out of mind. For ongoing in verse 5, constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and the mountains and gashing himself with stones. He was his own worst enemy. And the evidence of that is seen by how tormented he'd become. Maybe somebody comes to mind for you. We don't get insight into exactly what kind of decisions this man may have made that had left him vulnerable to such demonic oppression. We don't know for sure. very well could be from a biblical perspective that he had entered into the whole realm of idol worship and presented himself to that. And Paul teaches in the New Testament that behind every idol is some demonic influence. So if he had submerged himself into that environment, it may very well have left him vulnerable to such oppression. All we know, it was wrecking his life. You've seen evidence of that in your world. You know? People making decisions that introduced things. Now we've gotten, 21st century Western culture. The activity in the spiritual realm is much less visible to us, but I dare say to you, still very active. The adversary, the first thing I thought when I heard the news of the shooting that took place this week, the enemy came to kill, steal, and destroy. And he's well on his way to destroying the life of this man in Mark chapter 5. People had rejected him. They just wanted him out of the way. They didn't want anything to do with him anymore. They tried to control him. They could not. And now he was just off by himself. But verse 6, seeing Jesus. Seeing him from a distance, he ran up and bowed before him. Only we can see even here in the next verse, shouting with a loud voice, he said, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me." So we see the activity of even that which was oppressing him at work here. Jesus confronts him. What is your name? That's where this whole notion of the legion comes up. And he pleads with him not to let us go into the pigs. It's a fascinating concept. My father-in-law and I would tell you we may have had some descendants of those pigs that didn't always do what you wanted them to do. Sure enough, Jesus gives them permission, and into the hogs they go and off over the cliff. And people just did not know how to process that. The herdsmen then ran away and reported it in the city. The people came out to see what had happened. And verse 15, they came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed sitting down, clothed, and in his right mind. That's the kind of impact that an encounter with Jesus can have, even in the most desperate of situations. Now, I don't know how far to push this, but at least I want you to spend some time considering it. We have no clue really as to how much of the decision-making capacity of this man was even involved here. As much as it was an opportunity for Jesus to demonstrate that he is Lord of all things. And even the fallen demonic world follows his directives. Jesus just chose to intervene and demonstrate to this community of people who he was and what he was capable of doing, and that the living word speaks the word, and even the demonic responds. He's still the same Jesus. And even into circumstances and situations in the lives of people that we may look at and say, beyond reach, be done with them, you're out of here, you're dead to me. Jesus can turn that around. Because that's who he is. Don't lose track of that hope for people in the throes of the destructive, demonic world. Don't lose that hope. He can show up and give them that gift of deliverance. Sometimes it's us believing that a power greater than any situation can restore order into someone's life. The people heard it all described, and they asked Jesus to please leave the neighborhood. Go tell. Well, they had just lost 2,000 pigs. But they said, "Sir, we would like you to leave. We don't know what to do with you either." To the crazy man, they said, "Get out of here. We don't want to." To Jesus, they said, "We'd like you to go on. You what?" And the one guy, the man who had suddenly received this gift of life. "Jesus, I'd like to go with you. If you're leaving, wherever you're going, I'm going." And Jesus said, "Why don't you just go back and tell everybody what great things the Lord has done for you? There it is. Go home to your people." He didn't usually do this, but this man was from a Gentile region. I think it's the Decapolis that he hailed from. He said, "You just go back there and tell them. Tell them what great things the Lord has done for you." Might I ask you how prepared and rehearsed you are to do that? And how often are you looking for and anticipating opportunities to do that? To share with others the great things the Lord has done for you, how He had mercy on you. Fine opportunity there. Into the midst of that, Jesus gets in the boat and away he goes. A large crowd gathered. He stays by the seashore, and suddenly what did I say? Did I say a seashore? Let me wet my whistle a little bit. The seashore, gathering seashells. All right. No, he was ready to interact with the next of our three interactions. A synagogue official named Jairus came up on seeing him, fell at his feet. Oh, we read that how many times through the years. We were familiar with this story. First of all, recognize how Jairus is described. Jairus, he is a synagogue official. As early as Mark chapter 3, 2 chapters before, the Pharisees and the Herodians had already decided that they would destroy Jesus. You may rest assured that the memos had begun circulating into the synagogues, which were scattered Jewish places of worship and learning, to watch out for this guy, be aware of this guy. And ordinarily, the synagogue officials would have bought in. They would have, "Okay, we got it, we hear you," and would have respected that authority and that determination, assuming that they had heard that. But isn't it interesting that this synagogue official, something was going on in his life that allowed him to look past the prevailing opinion about Jesus and come in a sign of great humiliation to acknowledge there's something going on in my life that I can't control, I can't manage. I need intervention. I need a power greater than myself to make a difference in what I am experiencing. And he humbled himself. He fell at Jesus' feet. Have you ever done that in your life? I'm not talking about Jesus. Don't spiritualize it. I'm just talking about anybody. To embrace humility to the point that you kneel before them. Americans, we don't bend, we don't bow, we don't break kind of thing, right? Well, Jairus had encountered something of great significance that had him on his face before Jesus, in spite of the fact that it could very well have jeopardized his standing in the community and his place in the synagogue. Jews desperately did not want to be removed from the synagogue. That was the scariest of things for them. That was their connection to their ancestry for thousands of years. But there can be situations that arise in our lives that say, that doesn't matter in comparison to what I'm facing right now. And the next verse will tell us. Implored him earnestly. My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will get well and live. You feel that? Some of you have felt that literally, physical illness and the threat of that reality. My perception is, if it was a personal illness, that would be way easier to translate than one of my kids or grandkids. There would be a whole different, for me, man, I've been at this a long time. Time to go home? Okay, let's roll, you know? But one of my kids or grandkids, that's a different matter, and that's where Jairus found himself. Even if it was an unpopular move to welcome Jesus in, he's going to welcome Jesus in, or at least he works real hard to welcome Jesus in. She is at the point of death. You may have to go with it a little more metaphorically. You may have had someone in the clutches of a life-threatening addiction of whatever sort. Or challenges of the mind that was communicating to your child that maybe life isn't just isn't worth living. You feel what Jairus was feeling, or have felt. Even the prospect of the loss of a child can cause quivers in our soul, yes? Then you know where Jairus found himself. He felt a need to humble himself very visibly and implored Jesus earnestly. Great passion. He leaned into this request. This was a desperate man. And oh, how it must have felt. In verse 24, he went off with him. You don't know what Jesus said. Maybe he put his arms around that. Let's go. Maybe just turn around to the guys and say, hey, we're on mission. Come on. We're going with this guy. Can you imagine the swing of emotion that just took place in that father's heart? Suddenly, hope was restored. It was on shaky ground before. All the potential implications of him coming to Jesus. And now all of a sudden hope was restored. Jesus is coming home with me. You know, when you get some glimmer of hope that one that you are so gravely concerned about is showing signs of a turn, a change of mind. And that hope glimmers. He went off with him, and a large crowd was following and pressing in on him. Hit the pause on Jairus there just a minute, and we're going to find individual number 3. A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years. Yes, we would like a little more information. Could we get a diagnostic on this, please? What was going on with her? We don't get that kind of information, but if you do a little digging around in the Old Covenant, you would find out that that woman would have remained unclean for 12 years from the perspective of ceremonial worship at the temple. And nobody would have wanted to have been around her and interacted with her for fear that they too might have then therefore been unclean and you get back out of this, 12 years. 2013, quick. Anybody got a point of reference? What was going on in your life 12 years ago? 2013. It seems like they just clip by so quick, I just can't even get a fix on 2013, but that's how long that had been. 12 long years. And complicated by what we find next in verse 26. She had endured much at the hands of many physicians. Much and many, and had spent all she had. She had endured much, many physicians. She had expended her resources at the end of her rope, and yet had not been helped at all. No matter what she had tried, it didn't change her circumstance. Her physical condition continued. Actually, it was getting worse. It's unlikely that we can relate directly to this particular circumstance, but some of you have been walking in situations, whether it's yourself personally or with those around you that you care very much about, for over a decade, and it just doesn't seem like anything is changing, anything is getting any better. Then you know what this lady felt like. And she said, well, what have I got to lose? I'm out of options. Life had become unmanageable, if you want to borrow some of our wording. And she'd heard about the reputation of Jesus. She wasn't even as bold as Jairus was to come up and think that she ought to get an audience face-to-face, one-on-one to deliver her request. The notion in the day was that when power people moved around, you didn't have to get a touch or any, you didn't have them to touch you or get this exclusive audience. Why, if you just clipped the hem of their garment, the healing would flow to you. And so that's what brought her to this point. How poorly did she feel of herself? How far had she sunk? I can't even ask Jesus to do anything for me. I would make him unclean if he touched me. So I'll just sneak in the crowd and do a little flyby. A little clandestine withdrawal from the healing bank and see what happens. What have I got to lose? I'm out of resources. The doctors just keep showing me the door. I'm getting worse as I go. So sure enough, she sneaks in. Touches the garment. Jesus, in the midst of all the chaos and commotion, hey, wait a minute. Somebody just made a withdrawal here. Somebody touched me. And the guys living in the here and now world like we generally do said, Jesus, who didn't touch you? It's kind of the idea, right? He said, no, you don't get it. You don't get it. Something else has happened here. He looked around to see the woman who had done this. The woman was fearing and trembling. Oh boy, I've done it now. Aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. She was operating volitionally, purposely came to Jesus, operating in her faith that he could change her circumstance, as opposed to the man in our first encounter who was out of his blaming mind and didn't know which way was up. Jesus chose to intervene in that. Here, she made the decision, if I get to Jesus, maybe he can change this. That was faith. And Jesus celebrated it and said, that's what it took. That's what it took. I can't help but, Jackie's a great question asker. She asks me questions all the time. I say, I don't know. What was next for this lady? Had they discovered that she had this issue and therefore was unclean and barred from all the public? If they had found out that would have been the case, maybe she made right back to the temple to be declared clean and everything is good again and returning to normal life. But we don't get any of that. But her life had been changed by this encounter with Jesus. She invited him in and he came. Her life was different. In the midst of that glowing encounter, servants of Jairus show up and say, we don't need Jesus anymore. It's too late. Your daughter's died. And Jesus won't have it. He just, overhearing what was being spoken, said, don't be afraid any longer. Just only believe. Throughout this text, there is this stark contrast between fear and faith. As we invite Jesus in, we have likely been walking in fear that nothing was ever going to change. Once we get to this point of step 2, where we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us, that's the faith piece. As we invite him into our brokenness, whatever it looks like. Does it work for drunks and junkies? Yes, it does. Any hands in the room? It works. How many years, brother, now sobriety? 43 years of sobriety. Glory to God, you know. It works for drunks and junkies, alcoholics and addicts. It also works for people who can't control their tongue, can't quit talking about other people in ways that just puff them up and tear others down so maybe they can preserve their own image. Can't. That same deliverance Jesus can bring to those of us who live in fear as opposed to walking in faith. On and on and on, whatever our brokenness is, where we're constantly trying to preserve the opinion of others about us, how they may think of us. Be free of that and let his opinion of you matter most. Jesus can make that happen. The uncertainty about tomorrow. Will I have enough? Will I be comfortable? Will I be secure? Invite Jesus into whatever it is that you're facing. Do you have trouble truth-telling? Do you have trouble truth-telling in love? You have trouble forgiving? How old are those grudges you're packing around? A word that came up recently was resentments. Anything that we can find to blame on somebody else so we don't have to take responsibility for our part. If you will come to believe that Jesus is the one who can restore us to a greater degree of that image in which we were created. I am powerless on my own to be the little Jesus that he has designed me to be. But when I partner with him, it's on its way. Sometimes it may very well be like these situations, instantaneous result. My experience has been, It's a season of incremental, gradual changing and altering, transformation. You know the etymology of that word, transformation. It's metamorphosis. Like the nasty old caterpillar that goes into the cocoon, and they say inside that cocoon it just turns to gross stuff. I know my share of gross stuff because it's not like Jesus, and I want it to look gross to me. To submit to that process, because then what comes climbing out of that cocoon? And you know, the beauty of a butterfly. For us, more like Jesus. Our politicians are not going to change America. They may put up some new guardrails. They may institute some new laws. But laws are only going to be effective in the hearts of people who are willing to submit to those laws. We need new hearts. We need transformation. Only Jesus can bring the transformation. Newsflash, He will not impose that upon you as a general rule. He waits for you to welcome His work and to invite Him in. For you to take the knee before Him. Jesus can do that. Jesus can. When we get to the point, as Ortberg reminds us in the book and in the videos on the website, when we get to the point where we're willing to say to Jesus, I can't keep my mouth shut. I can't stop being greedy and selfish and prideful. I can't. Jesus can and will meet you at that point. And the process of transformation accelerates from there. Austin French has a song titled, Jesus Can. And then I'll come back and close.